Welcome. Tonight's story drifts in softly, like something half-remembered, finally stepping back into the light. Part 1. My daughter-in-law gave me an envelope and said, "Thought you'd never figure it out." Hello. My name is Charlotte Benson. I'm 52, and I've been called many things in my life. Overly polite, to soft, the kind of woman who smiles through insult. But the day my daughter-in-law handed me that envelope with a smirk, I realized something remarkable. I wasn't the only one pretending. She thought she knew me, thought I was the kind of woman who would just nod and thank her. But she had no idea what I'd been preparing, quietly, for years. That night began like so many others. Long dinner table, clinking silverware, polite conversation, family pretending to like each other for 2 hours a month. My son James brought his wife, Madeline, wearing her usual silk blouse and contempt. She didn't help set the table. She never did. She only leaned in after dessert, as if to whisper something sweet, and handed me a pale gray envelope with gold trim. "Thought you'd never figure it out," she said, loud enough for the room to hear but quiet enough to sound innocent. The others chuckled. My husband gave me a puzzled look. James just rubbed his temple like he always did when she spoke. I held the envelope carefully, my fingers calm, but my heartbeat tapping like a watch. The weight of it told me it was real. The handwriting confirmed it was hers. I smiled and tucked it into my lap. "Thank you, dear," I said, not missing a beat. She blinked, just once. That was the only sign she hadn't expected that response. I didn't open it there. Of course not. That's what she wanted. She wanted gasps. She wanted a scene. But I've lived long enough to know. You never give a woman like Madeline the satisfaction of immediate outrage. You wait and you let her think she's ahead, because that's when they slip. And Madeline? She was already slipping. I could see it in the way she reached for her wine 3 times in 5 minutes, in the way her eyes darted toward James every time I looked at her, like she needed confirmation that she still had him wrapped. But James hadn't been hers in years. Not really. Not after what I found. Not after the calls, the bank statements, the sudden transfers, the little notes in my grandson's backpack, in handwriting that didn't belong to any teacher. That envelope in my lap. It wasn't a surprise. It was just a move. Her next one. But I'd already taken my turn. Months ago, Madeline thought she was playing chess with a pawn. She forgot I taught the game to her husband. That night, after everyone left, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the back porch with the crickets singing in the dark, and opened the envelope under the moonlight. And when I saw what she'd sent, when I saw what she thought I didn't know, I laughed. Not out of joy, not out of rage, but because I'd already written the ending to this story, and she'd walked right into it. Madeline always underestimated me because I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't challenge her when she made her little jabs. "Oh, Charlotte, you still use paper checks. Or that's so sweet. You knit things. It's like you're from another century." I let it all pass, not because I didn't notice, but because I did. Every word, every flicker of her eyes, every moment she thought she was better. She was trying to erase me from my own son's life, slowly, methodically. It started with small things. James forgetting our dinner dates, canceling visits with vague excuses, not returning my calls until days later. Then came the bigger ones. Him missing my birthday 2 years in a row, Madeline accidentally leaving me off group texts, and eventually, my grandson, Liam, stopping his little bedtime. video calls with me. At first I thought it was just how life changed. But no, it was her. I found out by accident. A message on James's old iPad he left at my house, syncing with his phone. A message from Madeline. Plain as day. Don't let her babysit again. She's too old. Liam needs to learn boundaries. That night I cried. Quietly. In the bathroom with the door locked. Not because of the insult, but because I knew it wasn't going to stop. And I'd spent too many years being gentle. So I decided that if Madeline was going to keep pushing me out, I'd start documenting everything. I bought a small notebook, kept it in my purse. Every interaction, every time she told me one thing and said another to James, I wrote it down. Every lie, every financial move, every snub, documented. I even started scanning receipts and saving emails. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe I just needed proof I wasn't going crazy. But then something changed. It was around the time I noticed the money missing from James's childhood trust, the one my husband and I set up after he turned 18. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help him through tough times. Now it was almost empty. I hadn't touched it. My husband hadn't either. That's when the pieces clicked. I spoke to the bank in person, requested the withdrawal logs, and there it was. Several large transfers made in the past year, all authorized with James's digital signature. But I knew my son. I knew his patterns, and those withdrawals didn't match them. The bank said they couldn't disclose more, but that was enough for me. I didn't confront James. I didn't confront her. I just kept going, quietly, patiently. Because one thing I've learned in my 52 years, people who think they're winning get sloppy. Madeline got sloppy. And the envelope she gave me? It was supposed to be her grand finale. She didn't know I'd been writing the real story all along. After that, everything became sharper, clearer, like I'd been walking through fog and suddenly found glasses that actually worked. I paid closer attention to their conversations, at family gatherings, to how James looked at her, how often he deferred to her silence, how quickly he brushed off my concerns with "she's just tired, Mom," or "she didn't mean it like that." But I knew. I watched the way Liam clung to his father, the way his eyes dimmed when Madeline called his name. She had a tone, not loud, not cruel, but cold, dismissive, as if everyone in the room was already beneath her, including her own child. That was the part that made my chest tighten at night. Not her insults toward me, not even the stolen money, but what I saw her doing to that little boy. Liam used to draw me pictures every week, ask to call me before bed, bring me dandelions from their yard. Now he barely said hello. And once, when I bent to hug him, he flinched. I asked him later, while we played a quiet board game in the den, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" He nodded. Too fast. I asked, "Do you ever want to come stay with Grandma for the weekend?" Again, he hesitated, then whispered, "She said you don't like me anymore." My hands froze. I didn't show it. I smiled and said, "That's silly. I love you all the time." But inside, something broke. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with the notebook open, reading every single entry I had written over the past year. I stapled receipts. I printed screenshots. I pulled credit logs. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. I wasn't interested in a war, but I was done being erased. That was when I contacted a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly. I asked about the trust, about custody options, about financial manipulation and emotional neglect. I told him I wasn't ready to act. I just needed to know what was possible. He looked through what I brought, page by page, and said one thing: "This isn't a journal. This is a case file." I cried on the drive home, not because I was sad, but because someone finally saw what I had seen for years. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. That's when I began drafting the letter. Not to Madeline, not to James, but to Liam, for the future. In it, I explained everything. That I had loved him since before he was born. That I had tried to protect him without tearing his world apart. That I was watching. That I saw him. I tucked that letter away in a sealed envelope, labeled it with a date 10 years from now, and placed it in the safe, just in case, because no matter what happened, I wanted him to know that I never disappeared. I just waited for the right moment to come back for him. And when Madeline gave me that smug little envelope after dinner, I realized something else. She'd made her move too soon. I stayed calm that night, even as I folded her letter and slid it back into its envelope, even as I poured myself another glass of wine and looked out over the yard James used to play in. I remembered how he used to run barefoot through the grass, laughing, falling, scraping his knees, and how I'd scoop him up and tell him he was strong. He used to believe me. He used to believe in a lot of things. But somewhere along the way, he started believing in her instead. I don't blame him. Not fully. People like Madeline don't take control overnight. They chip away at your confidence, isolate you inch by inch until you forget where you used to stand. That's why I never yelled at him. That's why I never told him outright what I'd found. He wasn't ready, but he would be. The cracks were already forming. I saw it in his tired eyes, in the way he lingered before getting in the car that night, in how he hugged me just a second longer than usual, like something in him remembered who I really was. I'd planted enough seeds. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to keep building. The next day, I met with the same lawyer again, this time with a larger folder. Not just the financial trail, but the statements I'd gathered from neighbors, the voice memos I'd recorded after phone calls, the subtle comments Madeline made when she didn't realize my phone was still recording. I didn't say what I planned to do. I didn't even have to. The lawyer just nodded slowly and said, "We can proceed whenever you're ready." I wasn't ready yet, but I would be. Because now, I wasn't documenting for my own sanity. I was preparing for the day when James would finally see clearly, when he'd ask, "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" And I could hand him everything and say, "Because I wanted you to come to me on your own." Madeline thought the envelope was the final nail, but it was just a match, and she'd handed it to the woman holding the gasoline. This was just the beginning. Charlotte stayed quiet, but she was never blind. What comes next? Let's just say, the game she's playing is only warming up. Part 2. The file she never saw coming. The funny thing is, after all of it, the envelope, the smirk, the performance, Madeline didn't follow up. No call, no text, no "did you read it?" She assumed I'd either explode or crumble, that I'd do something dramatic enough to confirm the story she'd crafted about me. But when I didn't, when I stayed silent and smiled through the next few days like nothing happened, I could feel her start to twitch. Because women like her can't stand silence. Silence makes them nervous. Silence makes them think. And most importantly, silence makes them guess. So while she was spinning in her own paranoia, I was making appointments. I visited the notary. I met with a forensic accountant. I pulled records that went back 6 years. I had copies of every trust-related transaction James never knew about. And suddenly I saw something I hadn't seen before. The same vendor name appearing across 3 accounts. A little boutique marketing firm registered under an alias. But one name kept coming up in the back-end filings. Madeline's maiden name. I had her. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was fraud. But I wasn't rushing to court. Not yet. I knew that if I pushed too soon, James would dig in his heels. No. I needed him to come to me. And the way to do that wasn't through confrontation. It was through memory. So I started planting those 2. I invited him over one afternoon. Just him and Liam. Madeline was busy. She hated my house anyway. Too outdated, too cluttered. I made James's favorite lunch. The same grilled cheese and tomato soup I used to make when he was sick. Liam helped me stir. And for the first time in months, I saw him laugh. Really laugh. James watched him, his face softening. That flicker of doubt just barely behind his eyes. He asked, "Mom, do you think Liam's happy?" I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit in the air between us like smoke. Then I said, "I think he could be." He nodded slowly, then changed the subject. But I knew I'd cracked something. That night, I went into my study, unlocked the second drawer in my desk, and pulled out the copy of the prenup I had quietly requested through a family contact. 3 months ago, James didn't know I had it, but I'd been studying it, and now I knew exactly where the gaps were. What Madeline had slipped in. What she had kept quiet. There was a clause about inheritance protections, and another about joint ownership in the event of mental decline. It was subtle, but it meant that if James was ever declared under undue influence, the trust could legally shift control. I sat back in my chair, stunned. She wasn't just spending the money. She was setting the groundwork to make it hers permanently. And James had signed it, blindly, out of love, out of trust, or maybe just out of exhaustion. I stared at that clause for a long time, the legal language curling around my spine like ice. I had everything I needed, but I also had a grandson sleeping one room over who deserved a father not broken by betrayal. I wasn't going to destroy James to save him. I was going to help him wake up, quietly, precisely, and on my terms. Madeline wanted to play with knives. She forgot I was the one who sharpened them. A few days later, Madeline texted me out of the blue. "We're coming by this weekend. James says Liam misses you." No emoji, no warmth. Just that tight little message that always meant she was trying to reassert control. I responded politely, of course, looking forward to it. Then I spent the next day preparing not just the house but the conversation. Because this time, I wasn't just going to observe. I was going to let a few carefully placed truths slip. Not enough to make her panic. Just enough to make her start looking over her shoulder. When they arrived, Liam ran into my arms like he hadn't been told otherwise. Madeline was in heels, sunglasses, and perfume thick enough to choke a room, even though we were just having tea. James looked tired. She made some comment about how Grandma must be spoiling him already, and I just smiled and said, "Well, I've had some extra time lately since I stopped volunteering at the trust board. Too many red flags lately." Her head snapped up like a bird sensing a hawk. But I didn't look at her. I just poured tea and offered lemon. James didn't even notice. He was helping Liam unpack a little travel game. But I saw her fingers twitch around her cup. That was the first crack. Later, while James and Liam played on the porch, she followed me into the kitchen. I could feel her behind me, hovering, calculating. You said red flags, she asked, like it was just curiosity. I turned, met her eyes calmly, and replied, Yes. Odd transfers. Signatures. That didn't match. You know, things that make lawyers nervous. She didn't blink, just tilted her head. I'm sure it's nothing, she said sweetly. I nodded. I'm sure it's something. And I walked away. That night, I got an alert from the digital vault I'd set up. Someone had attempted to access the file labeled estate notes. It was encrypted and failed, of course, but I knew immediately who it was. And the fact that she was digging meant I'd gotten under her skin, which was perfect, because I had another meeting scheduled the next morning, one she'd never see coming. I wasn't going to war. I was setting the trap, and I'd already baited it with her favorite thing, her own arrogance. The meeting the next morning wasn't with a lawyer. It was with a retired investigator I'd met through the church charity board, a quiet man named Roland who'd once audited corporate fraud for a living and now spent his time helping women untangle messy estates and abusive financial traps. I showed him what I had, spread it across the table in neat chronological stacks, and he didn't say much at first. He just flipped page after page, occasionally nodding or tapping his pen against a margin where numbers didn't line up. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "This isn't just a pattern. This is intentional layering. She's laundering money through a dummy firm with your son's name on it." I felt something deep in my stomach tighten, not out of fear, but out of confirmation. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Roland helped me chart out the movements, how she'd slowly funneled money out of the trust into consulting services, how those funds were redirected to a second account under her cousin's name, a man who hadn't filed taxes in 4 years and who conveniently showed up at their house every Thanksgiving with a bottle of wine and no job. I asked Roland if this was enough. He looked at me and said, "It's more than enough, but you need to decide what you want. Do you want to expose her, or do you want to set the terms?" That question stayed with me all day. I sat with it while pruning the rose bushes in my backyard, while stirring soup on the stove, while folding a blanket Liam had left behind last visit. And by evening, I knew I didn't want a scandal. I didn't want to ruin James's life with headlines or courtrooms. What I wanted was leverage. Quiet, unshakable leverage. So I drafted the first letter, not to the court, not to the press, but to Madeline herself. I didn't send it. Not yet. I just wanted to hold it. I wanted to feel the weight of what I could do if I chose. And as I sat in my armchair that night, the lamp casting gold across the envelope, I realized the most powerful thing I could be wasn't a victim or even a hero. It was a witness, a quiet, meticulous, unignorable witness. She had made the mistake of thinking I'd never figure it out. But now I had. And the scariest thing for her wasn't that I'd fight back. It was that I might wait, watch, let her unravel herself. Because women like Madeline can't help but double down when they're nervous. And I'd already set the stage. All she had to do was keep performing. If the unraveling came faster than I thought it would. A week after I drafted that letter, James showed up at my house without calling. It was raining hard, and he looked pale, drenched, confused, like a man who had just run from something he no longer recognized. I brought him inside, handed him a towel, made tea without asking, and waited. He sat at the kitchen table like he used to as a teenager when he needed to confess something, but didn't have the words. Eventually he said, Did you? No, she opened another account. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just let the silence hold the truth for both of us. I found the statements, he said. They were buried in some junk folder she didn't think I checked. There's money missing. A lot. I nodded gently and slid a folder across the table. You're not crazy, I said. He opened it and stared for a long time. His shoulders dropped in a way that made him look like a boy again. Small and heartbroken and furious all at once. How long? He asked. Over a year, I replied. He didn't speak for a while. He just kept flipping pages. I watched him go through every receipt, every signature, every hidden wire. At one point he whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" And I said softly, "Because I needed you to see it. Not hear it from me. See it for yourself." That's when he cried. Quietly, a single hand over his mouth. And I didn't hug him. I just sat with him. Because sometimes a son doesn't need comfort. He needs someone to sit still while his reality collapses. The next morning, he called a lawyer. Not mine, his own. And I didn't interfere. I just handed him the full file and said, "If you want the originals, they're yours." Later that week, I received a voicemail from Madeline. Cold. Controlled. "I see what you've done. Just know I won't forget it." I replayed it twice. Not out of fear, but because her voice finally trembled at the end. And then I deleted it. I didn't need it anymore. She was finished. Not because I screamed. Not because I fought. But because I let the truth breathe long enough for the right person to feel its weight. And now, she'd spend every day wondering what else I might know. What else I might have seen. What I might still be holding. Quietly, patiently, powerfully. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't look like fire. Sometimes it looks like calm. Like a woman sitting in her armchair, waiting, while everything that tried to erase her slowly folds in on itself. She never needed to raise her voice. Charlotte let the truth speak, and it spoke louder than any threat. If you felt that chill too, make sure to subscribe to Last Stories, because Part 3, that's when the silence breaks. Part 3, the gloves are off. James didn't tell her right away. I knew that because 3 days after he came to me, 3 days after he sat in my kitchen holding the evidence of his wife's betrayal, Madeline posted a photo of them online, smiling at a gala, arms around each other, all sparkle and illusion. The caption read, "Forever grateful for this man." Through everything, I stared at it for a long moment, not because I believed it, but because I knew exactly what she was doing. Control the narrative. Keep the optics clean. Make sure no one suspects. But behind those pixels was a man who had started to see the cracks, and a woman who knew it. And just like that, the performance began to unravel. Slowly at first. James called me again, this time asking questions in careful tones. "Did you ever notice how she tracks our accounts? Or do you think Liam's been quieter lately? Each one a breadcrumb. Each one a step away from her and toward the truth." I never pushed. I just answered honestly, gently. I knew what it felt like to realize your reality had been manufactured. It takes time to stop seeing through their lens. But once you do, you can't unsee it. I saw the shift in him even more when he brought Liam over again that Sunday. No Madeline. No excuses. Just father and son. He looked exhausted, but calmer, more grounded. I served tea while Liam played on the rug, and James just sat there, quiet for a long time. Then finally said, "She's threatening to move out." Said she'd take Liam if I ever questioned her again. That was the moment I stopped being passive. I leaned forward. placed my hand over his and said, "You don't have to let fear guide your next step. You're not alone in this." He nodded slowly, but I could see the panic building beneath his composure. That night, I opened the second safe in my bedroom, the one even James didn't know about, and pulled out the true file. Everything, from the very beginning. Emails, bank logs, audio recordings, a timeline of inconsistencies and manipulation that went back farther than even I'd realized. I hadn't planned on giving it to him yet, but she'd crossed a line, threatening. To take Liam wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous. So the next morning, I met James at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. No one noticed us. We were just two people drinking coffee. I slid the folder across the table and said, "If she wants to play legal, let's make sure you have the better hand." He didn't even ask what was inside. He just picked it up, tucked it into his coat, and whispered, "Thank you." I watched him leave through the fogged glass, his figure fading into the winter morning. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this. He wasn't afraid of her anymore, and that terrified her more than anything. It didn't take long for her to notice the shift. I hadn't even posted anything, hadn't spoken to anyone, but the silence was enough. 2 days after James took the folder, she called me. I didn't answer. The next day, she showed up at my door. I heard the knock, slow and deliberate, and when I opened it, there she stood, not angry, not fake smiling, just calculating. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside, let her in, sat down across from her at the kitchen table like we were two women discussing dinner plans, not the slow implosion of her carefully curated life. She folded her hands neatly on the table and opened with, "I know what you did." I tilted my head, kept my voice calm. "Which part?" She blinked once, just once, but it told me everything. She didn't know how much I knew. She was bluffing, testing the waters. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence wrap around us until she finally snapped, "You turned James against me." I laughed, just once, soft and low. "No, Madeline, you did that. I just let him see what was already there." Her hands curled slightly into fists. "Do you think this makes you a hero?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I think it makes me a mother." And for the first time since she walked in, she didn't have a retort. I saw the flicker, that brief, unguarded moment when she realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. That I never had been. I had simply waited for the moment when it would matter. She stood abruptly, like she couldn't stay seated another second. "You've ruined everything." I smiled. "No, I've restored what you tried to steal." She turned and left, heels clicking sharp against the tile. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch from the window. I just returned to the table, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and exhaled. She had come to confront me, thinking I'd be rattled. But she walked into a house where every move had already been played, and she didn't even realize she was already out of pieces. The funny thing was, once she left that day, she didn't come back. Not physically, not even digitally. No texts, no calls. Not even one of her passive-aggressive quotes on social media that she used to direct at me. Just silence. But not the kind that meant surrender. No, this was the kind of silence that builds pressure, the kind that makes people dangerous. So I stayed alert, checked my security system twice a day, triple-checked my locks, changed my passwords and alerted my lawyer to be ready for anything. But nothing came. Not for a week. Not for 2. Until I got a call from Liam's school. The Counselor said he'd asked to talk privately, then said, "Sometimes my mom tells me grandma won't be around much longer, that she's too weak and confused to take care of anyone." I froze. The counselor added, gently, "It wasn't just once. He says it happens often, usually when he talks about you." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car, staring at the dashboard while the engine idled. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. I was calculating, because Madeline hadn't just gone quiet, she'd shifted tactics. When she lost control over the adults, she went for the child. That's what women like her do. If they can't poison your name directly, they do it by planting seeds in those you love. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to my church, sat in the third pew from the back, like I used to when I needed to think clearly, and prayed. Not for her, not for forgiveness, but for clarity, for steadiness, for the strength to finish this without losing who I was in the process. And when I got home that night, I knew what I needed to do next. I opened my drawer and took out the second letter I had written, the one meant for James in case something ever happened to me. I hadn't planned to give it to him now, but the way things were moving, I couldn't risk what might happen if Madeline escalated further. So I updated the letter, sealed it, and gave it to my lawyer for safekeeping. "Only release it if I'm unable to," I told him. He nodded, no questions asked, and I walked out of that office not afraid of her anymore, because I had already stripped her of the one thing she clung to most, the illusion of control. 2 weeks later, the silence broke, not from her, but from James. He showed up at my house late on a Thursday, eyes red, voice low, Liam asleep in the back seat. He stood on the porch for a long moment before saying, "She left." I didn't speak. I let him continue. "She found out I moved half the accounts, changed guardianship contacts, froze the trust until legal review. She screamed for 2 hours, said I betrayed her, said you poisoned me. Then she packed a suitcase and walked out." He looked tired, but not broken. Just finally done. I led him inside. He laid Liam down on the couch under the same whereupon blanket I'd wrapped him in as a baby. Then he sat across from me and asked, "Do you think I was blind?" I answered honestly, "I think you were hopeful." That's not the same. We sat there for a long time. No more need for files or proof, or whispers. The damage had already bloomed, but the healing had quietly begun. A week later, I got a letter. Not from Madeline, not directly. It came through her lawyer. A quiet little document requesting amicable resolution and voluntary division of assets. She didn't even try to fight. She just wanted out, clean and fast. That's when I knew. She wasn't staying silent because she was planning something. She was staying silent because she finally knew what it felt like to lose. But the real ending didn't happen in a lawyer's office or a courtroom. It happened one night when Liam came into my kitchen, climbed up on the counter like he used to when he was 5, and said, "Dad said I can stay with you for a while." I nodded, heart thudding, hands calm. He added, "I'm glad. You always feel like home." I smiled, tucked a curl behind his ear, and said, "That's because I never left you." And I hadn't. Not for 1 second. Even when Madeline tried to erase me, even when James pulled away, even when the world told me to be quiet, to be small, to let go, I didn't. I stayed. And in the end, that was what saved us. Not revenge, not rage, but the slow, quiet power of refusing to disappear. Charlotte never screamed. She never begged. She never broke. And that's exactly what made her unstoppable. She let the silence speak, the truth do the cutting, and watched as everything built on lies began to collapse under its own weight. But just because Madeline's gone doesn't mean the story is over. Some people don't stay gone, especially when they think they still have something to win. Part 4. The past came knocking. It started with a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just steady. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard it, and for a moment I thought maybe James forgot his keys, or Liam wanted to surprise me again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't family. It was a courier. No words, just a clipboard and a manila envelope. I signed without asking. I knew before I opened it. Something in the air told me Madeline wasn't done. Inside was a single typed page, civil, cold, sterile. She was requesting visitation. Not of James, of Liam, and not just a casual visit. She wanted weekends, holidays, summer breaks, like nothing had ever happened, like we hadn't peeled back the rot and exposed what she really was. I read the letter twice, hands steady, heartbeat slow. Then I sat down and called James. I didn't dramatize. I just read it aloud. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "She's not doing this for Liam. She's doing it to get back at us." I agreed, but I also knew what that meant. If she was willing to fight dirty, we had to fight cleaner, smarter. We'd spent months collecting truth. Now it was time to use it. Not to attack, to protect. The next few weeks blurred into meetings with lawyers, family therapists, guardians ad litem. We filed motions, updated documentation, submitted everything we had, timelines, patterns, affidavits from counselors. Even the school's internal notes on Liam's behavior. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure she couldn't twist her way back into his life like smoke under a door. Liam was calmer now. He smiled more, ate more, slept better. He laughed out loud. He drew again. James told me once that he caught him making a picture of my kitchen, down to the chipped floral teacup I always used. That was the kind of healing we were guarding. And I knew, deep in my chest, that no courtroom trick or crocodile tears would erase what Liam already felt in his bones. Safety. But Madeline didn't go quietly. Her lawyer filed a formal challenge, claimed emotional alienation, manipulation, undue influence. She even tried to flip it. Accused me of being controlling, of turning Liam against her. Said I had orchestrated the whole thing for financial gain. When the judge read that line, he glanced at me over his glasses. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to, because by then, I had already prepared the final folder. And inside was a letter, not from me, not from James, but from Liam's own therapist. It read, "In all my sessions with this child, the clearest pattern is his sense of emotional safety with his grandmother. He does not report fear. He does not report pressure. What he does express is a consistent involuntary desire to remain in her care." I knew right then that would be the nail. Not anger, not vengeance, just truth. Documented, undeniable. Written by a professional with no skin in the game. When the judge ruled, it was simple. Petition for visitation is denied. Just like that. No drama, no gasps, just silence. And Madeline, who had been sitting to rows behind us, dressed in white like she thought it might soften her, stood up and walked out without looking back. But I did. I looked. Not because I wanted to see her pain, but because I wanted to witness her exit. The end of her illusion, her performance, her reach. She had underestimated me one final time. Thought I would collapse under legal pressure. But I didn't just survive. I won. Quietly. Decisively. And I did it without becoming her. After the ruling, life settled into something new. Not quiet, not perfect, but honest. James found a rhythm with work and fatherhood that I hadn't seen in him since before he met her. He still had moments where the weight caught up to him. Late night calls, long silences over coffee. But he was healing. And Liam bloomed. He started calling this house home without thinking. Left his shoes by the front door. Drew little hearts on post-its and stuck them to my fridge. One night, I found him asleep with one of my old cardigans wrapped around him, and I just stood there in the doorway, heart cracked wide open. But even in peace, I stayed alert. Madeline was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant she was watching, calculating, waiting for a crack to wedge herself back through. I didn't underestimate her this time. I met with a security consultant, upgraded the cameras, and added to off-site backups for everything. Financials, legal files, even Liam's school records. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Then, just as the air began to feel safe again, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Hers. I opened it in the kitchen, my hand steady, my breath calm. It read, "I hope you're happy. You ruined a family. You'll be alone when he grows up and sees you for who you really are." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it was pathetic. She still didn't understand. She thought I needed to be liked, needed to be praised. She didn't get it. I wasn't building a version of myself for approval. I was protecting the boy she treated like a pawn. I tucked the letter into a plastic sleeve, filed it, and added a note to the digital log. That same night, Liam and I baked a pie. He laughed when flour got on my nose, and I let him eat a second slice even though it was past bedtime. He hugged me tighter before bed and whispered, "You always make things feel better." I smiled in the dark, because that was the only letter I needed, the only proof. Let her write 100 more. Let her scream into the void. I wasn't in the business of proving anything to her. I had already won the only way that mattered. I gave that child a safe place to land, and I wasn't letting go. The holidays came quicker than expected. It was our first Christmas without her. No posed photos, no curated gifts with designer tags, no awkward tension behind glass smiles. Just us, James, Liam, and me. We decorated the house in a way Madeline never let us. Handmade garlands, mismatched ornaments, flour on every surface by the time the cookies were done. Liam made a card that said, "To Grandma, thank you for giving me back my dad." I didn't cry when I read it. I waited until he went to sleep, then sat alone by the tree and let the tears come. Not because I was sad, but because everything we had fought for was right there in front of me. Then, on New Year's Eve, I got another envelope. No handwriting this time, just my name, typed, delivered by courier again. Inside was a legal notice. Madeline was relocating, permanently, out of state. She had filed a request to dissolve any remaining claims of contact. No explanation, no fight, just a vanishing act. For a moment, I thought it might be a trap. But my lawyer confirmed it. She was gone, closed out her accounts, signed away all parental claims, and disappeared like a shadow that finally gave up chasing the light. I walked outside that night and stood on the porch while the neighborhood counted down to midnight. Fireworks went off in the distance, and I thought, this is how you end a war. Not with a bang, but with peace. Liam woke up early the next morning and crawled into bed with me, asking if we could make pancakes. I said yes, and as I flipped them on the griddle, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. For years I had felt like a side character in someone else's play, like I was always adjusting, apologizing, shrinking to keep the peace. But not anymore. Madeline's exit wasn't just a victory. It was an exhale, a final, irreversible shift in power. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to, because the truth had already outlived every performance she staged. And Liam? He was growing in that truth, rooted in it, thriving because of it. I knew there would be more storms. There always are. But we had weathered the worst one and come out stronger. Together, the spring came slowly that year, but when it did, it felt different, like something had been reset. James started dating again, carefully, quietly, the way a man does when he's learning to trust the ground under his feet again. I didn't ask questions. I didn't intrude. I just watched him laugh a little more freely, sleep a little deeper, step a little lighter. And Liam, he blossomed. He joined the soccer team, made a best friend, started asking curious questions about the world instead of fearful ones. He once pointed to a photo of me and said, "You look like a real hero in this one." I told him I wasn't a hero, just someone who stayed. And I meant it. I stayed through the manipulations, through the silence, through the battles fought in courtrooms and kitchen tables alike. I stayed when Madeline tried to erase me, rewrite the narrative, twist truth into something sharp and false. And in the end, she lost not because I fought harder, but because I never stopped standing. I planted my feet in truth, in love, in quiet resilience. I never screamed. I never stooped. I never surrendered. And that terrified her, because women like her rely on chaos. They think control is power. But I had something better, roots. And those roots held us together. When Liam turned 9, he asked if he could hang one of his drawings on the fridge permanently. It was a picture of the three of us, him, James, and me, holding hands under a big oak tree. In the corner he'd written in crooked letters, "My real family." I left it there. It's still there now, because this wasn't just about taking someone down. It was about rebuilding what she tried to break, piece by piece, moment by moment. I don't know if Madeline will ever try to come back. People like her rarely stay gone forever. But I do know this. If she does, she won't find what she left. She'll find a boy who knows his worth, a son who knows who really stood by him, and a woman who didn't just survive the storm. She outlived it, on her own terms, without rage, without revenge, just resolve. That's the story she never counted on, and it's the one I'll carry, quietly, proudly, for the rest of my days. Charlotte didn't scream. She didn't chase. She didn't crumble. She simply stood her ground, gathered every broken piece of truth, and built something stronger. In silence. She didn't ruin Madeline. Madeline unraveled herself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection, legacy, and quiet resilience. The kind of strength only some women understand. If her story moved you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe to Twisted Voices, where every story cuts deeper, because it's told exactly how it was felt.